Hello and welcome to the video. Today I'm going to take you through my top 5 exercises for you to get big glutes. Now, before I start, there are 2 things that I need to say. The first thing is that with lower body exercises in particular, many great exercises hit multiple muscle groups. So with the classic barbell back squat is fantastic for helping you to develop your glutes, particularly at the bottom of the squat when you're in the hole and your glutes are fully stretched. If you do astergrass squats, that will really target your glutes. However, squats obviously also incorporate many other muscle groups. They'll involve the quads, the hamstrings and the calves heavily, as well as upper body muscles like your upper back and your core to help stabilize the weight. If you are going to train your legs all together on a leg day or a lower day, I highly recommend you doing large compound lifts like the barbell back squat. I would do them at the beginning of your workout and then do isolation exercises for each of your quads, your glutes, your hamstrings and your calves. The list today will not include any large compound lifts like that. This list will involve just glute targeted exercises. I do, however, recommend with glutes though that you also train them at the same time as hamstrings. I said this in the hamstring video. Both the glutes and the hamstrings are responsible for hip extension. So anytime you hip extend, it will isolate the glutes, but it'll also involve the hamstrings and vice versa. So I would recommend training them together because they're going to get trained together whether you like it or not. And the second thing that I need to say is that, as always, there are 4 things that I am looking for from an exercise when judging how good it is. How much of a stretch the muscle gets during the exercise, how much of a contraction the muscle gets, how isolated the muscle is, and how heavy you can load the exercise. I prioritize isolation because if you fully isolate a muscle, it has to respond to that training stimulus. That is just my opinion though. You will hear varying things within the fitness space. Some people will prioritize load. They'll say you have to lift big weights to get big muscles. Some people prefer the stretch on a muscle. Some people recommend focusing on the contraction of a muscle. Whatever it is, I prefer isolation, as I say, because if you fully isolate a muscle, it has to respond to the training that you are doing. It has to adapt, and if you get stronger at that exercise, you know it's that muscle that is improving. But that is just my opinion. As with all of this list today, feel free to disagree with me in the comments or tell me your favorite glute exercise down below. But without further ado, let's get to it. So coming in spot number 5 are Bulgarian split squats. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but you said you weren't going to involve any compound exercises that involved other muscle groups like the quads and the hamstring, and Bulgarian split squats do. Yes, well done. Well noticed, have a gold star. However, there are a few technical changes we can make to Bulgarian split squats to make them primarily a glute exercise to help isolate that glute more and ensure that it is the muscle that's going to fatigue fully first. So the first thing that you can do is widen your stance. When you widen your stance with a Bulgarian split squat and send your hips backwards as you lower, you will help shift the tension from your quads onto your glutes. So if you were to have a narrow stance and send your knees forward over your toes, you involve your quads heavily. I would advise moving your foot forward by about 1 foot's length. Think of keeping your front shin vertical and send your hips backwards. That is going to make the glutes more active and the quads less active. The second thing you can do is keep going until you are fully at depth. Go as deep as you can and sit into the hip of your front leg. That will help you get an amazing stretch on the glute, and it will really help isolate your glutes more. Don't sit into the wrong hip, don't sit into the back leg's hip. If you do that, that's going to increase the stretch on the back quad and target your quads more. We obviously don't want that to happen. Make sure that you're sitting into the right hip, the hip of the front leg, and that will help stretch the glute. Then come back up the same way that you went down, keeping your shins vertical to make sure that the glutes are doing more of the work. And as you hit the top, think of thrusting your hips all the way through. Make sure your hips are fully extended and contract the glutes. That is going to help you get a great contraction on the glutes during this exercise. Now, Obviously, you are not going to fully isolate the glutes. The quads and the hamstrings are unfortunately also going to be involved. But if you do start to feel this exercise target the glutes more, you'll understand what I mean. You will get a great stretch on the bottom and a good contraction at the top. But if you simply can't feel your glutes and your quads are taking you over every time, it could be due to the technique, or it could just be your biomechanics. Your quads are always going to take over. I would advise doing some of the other exercises on this list because they will definitely not involve the quads and they will involve the hamstrings way less. They will isolate the glutes significantly better than Bulgarian split squats. But if you do Bulgarian split squats properly and start to feel your glutes, they can be a great addition to your glute training. And coming in spot number 4 are hip extensions. Now, if you've been keeping up with this series, you might be thinking they were also in the hamstring video. Yes, they were. However, as I said in both of these videos, the glutes and the hamstrings are both responsible for hip extension. So naturally, hip extensions are good for training both of them. However, there are a few technical changes you can do to make it target the glutes more. Basically the opposite of what we did in the hamstring video to target the hamstrings more. You can turn your feet outwards within the foot plate. What that is going to do is help make the contraction on your glutes much better. Your glutes in their fully contracted state are when your hips are fully extended and your feet are slightly turned out. If you literally do that standing up, you will feel your glutes start to squeeze way harder as you turn your feet out. So that is what I would advise doing, is turning your feet out, and at the top of the hip extension, really focus on squeezing those glutes. In this exercise, if you do that, you will get a fantastic contraction on the glutes, one of the best contractions on the glutes of all of the exercises today. You will also get a great stretch on the glutes as you go fully down into the stretch position. However, you will also feel your hamstrings in that position, so the isolation on the glutes is not perfect throughout this entire exercise. And the final thing I'll say is it is actually very easy to do drop sets with this exercise. If you find that your glutes are burning a lot, you can up the intensity of this exercise very easily, because when you do weighted versions of this exercise, you generally just hold the weight across your chest, keep going until you can't do any more, and then you can just drop the weight and do them body weight. So drop sets for hip extensions in particular are very effective. Overall, hip extensions are an amazing exercise for helping you grow your glutes. And coming in spot number 3 are hip thrusts, a classic glute building exercise. The main advantages of hip thrusts are that you get to place an amazingly high load on the glutes. Often you see people piling on the plates with hip thrusts, and that places a fantastic load on the glutes. The next main advantage is that you isolate the glutes very well. The glutes are going through a good range of motion, and at the top, they're going into their contracted state and hip extending. However, you're reducing hamstring involvement in that hip extension because the knees are bent. When the knees are bent, the hamstrings are less stretched and they're less involved in hip extension, which helps isolate the glutes more, and it means that that high load that you've applied is all being placed on the glutes. And the final main advantage is in that top position, because you've isolated the glutes very well and placed a high load on them, you get an amazing contraction with your hips fully extended as well. That is a great contracted position of the glutes, and with that high load and isolation, the contraction at the top is fantastic with hip thrusts. Now, there are 2 weaknesses with hip thrusts. The first one is that for some people, hip thrusts are unfortunately very uncomfortable, particularly barbell hip thrusts. They just place a lot of tension on your hips. I would advise using a soft pad, see if that helps, but if it doesn't, there are 2 different variations of hip thrusts that are actually better for people who really can't do hip thrusts because it just kills their hip bones. The first one is banded hip thrusts. Having the band is much softer on your hips, And the second one is machine hip thrusts. They use like a soft belt, which places the weight down into your hips, like not soft as in weak, but it's like a padded belt and it's way more comfortable than a hard barbell. But the main drawback to hip thrusts, unfortunately, for some people is that if you have poor quad flexibility, that is actually the limiting factor in that top position, stopping you from fully locking out your hips and getting that great isolation and contraction on the glutes. You actually reach the top and all you can feel is the quad stretching because those knees are bent behind. If that's you, I advise one, just working on your quad mobility, and as soon as that doesn't become the limiting factor, hip thrusts become a great exercise. Or two, I would advise just using some of the other exercises on this list. Overall, hip thrusts are an amazing exercise for helping you to develop your glutes. And coming in spot number 2 are reverse hypers. Now, if you saw my back video, you will have seen that reverse hypers were the bonus exercise, and you might be thinking, what on earth does back and glutes have to do with each other? Or if you've heard of reverse hypers anyway, you'll probably know that they are primarily a lower back exercise. That is because the inventor Louis Simmons herniated his lower back and designed a reverse hyper to help rehabilitate and strengthen his lower back. However, if you change the technique and the way you perform reverse hypers, the stimulus drastically changes on the body, and you can change reverse hypers from being a very effective lower back exercise to a very effective glute exercise. There are basically 2 main changes that we need to make. The first change from traditional reverse hypers is you need to rotate your feet outwards. If you turn your feet outwards, similar to in hip extensions, that allows the glutes to get into their fully contracted position at the top. Like I said, the glutes fully contracted position is with the hips fully extended and the feet turned out, and you will get into this position during reverse hypers. It will be right at the top when the weight feels the heaviest because the moment arm is the longest, and I advise really trying to contract the glutes there, and you can even try and hold the weight there. And the other main change we do is actually to the overall technique of motion. So with traditional reverse hypers, you allow the weight to swing and a lot of momentum is involved. You swing the weight up and you contract the lower back. You might have been told to extend the back upwards and accentuate that contraction on the lower back. And then you allow the weight to swing all the way back through, your feet to swing forward and to get decompression on your spine, and you flex your upper back. What we're going to do is keep the body from the hips upwards fixed in position, so you definitely don't move your upper back or anything, and we're not going to allow the weight to swing down and swing forwards or to use momentum on the way up. The weight should never swing past vertical. You should contract the weight up and then slowly lower down. More like a traditional exercise, like if you're doing dumbbell press, you lower the weight down and you contract the weight up. You don't use like swinging momentum, which traditional reverse hypers do. If you make these changes, you will target the glutes way more. You will have to lower the weight because you're not using momentum. You're going to have to lower the weight, but you will really target the glutes. You will get a fantastic contraction at the top, and you will definitely help develop your glutes. And coming in spot number 1 are glute kickbacks. Now, the main advantages of glute kickbacks are you isolate the glute amazingly. The glute is basically going to be moving the entire weight. So the isolation on the glute is fantastic throughout the whole range of motion of this exercise. And the other great advantage is you get a killer contraction on the glute. Sending your leg all the way back and thinking of squeezing your glute, you will get a fantastic contraction on the glute, particularly as well if you turn your foot out. Like I've said throughout this video, that helps increase the contraction on the glute. The way I actually do glute kickbacks is I don't bend my knee, I don't kick the weight back. It's more of a glute extension, a glute extend back. I extend the leg back and just think of squeezing the glute and then lower it back. The reason I do that, and I advise other people to do that, is because the glute has nothing to do with the knee. And bending your knee and having any joint action at the knee just doesn't affect the glutes, and if anything, it's just going to involve other muscles. If you simply extend your leg back and think of squeezing your glute, you are going to isolate and target that glute only during the exercise. With some things like machine glute kickbacks, you can't help, it's just the line of the machine. They're still effective, it will still isolate your glute very well, and they're all fantastic. But with something like a cable, or something like monkey feet, where you can have weights directly attached to your foot, I would advise keeping your knee straight and just extending your leg back and getting that great contraction on the glute. There are actually two big weaknesses with glute kickbacks, which is that you don't get a great load on the glute. You have to load it very light. That's not too much of an issue because all of the weight that you are using, because you're isolating the glute fully, is being placed on the glute. The glute's still having a great amount of tension placed on it. So boo-hoo, you don't get objectively a high weight. You still get to train the glute very effectively with the load that you have. But the bigger weakness is that you don't actually stretch the glute very well during the entire range of motion. And a stretch can be great for helping building a muscle, having a good full range of motion, as well as isolating it. Most of the other top exercises do have a good stretch on them as well. However, the simple solution to this is just pair glute kickbacks with another exercise that does have a good stretch on it. So it could be the Bulgarian split squat where you sit into the hip. It could be if you do regular squats and you're training lower altogether, at the bottom of a squat you get a great glute stretch. Maybe do pause squats or something to accentuate the time in that stretch position, and you will hit the glute in a stretch position as well. Now, before I end, the number one exercise I should say is a mixture of exercises. As always, there is something called the law of accommodation, which means if you do the same thing over and over, you eventually get worse. So even though glute kickbacks are fantastic, or some of the other exercises are amazing, I would rotate them out of my training and replace them with new exercises. Because that new training stimulus is going to help the muscle improve. That is actually what Arnold meant when he said shock the muscle. You need to shock the muscle into making more progress by applying a new training stimulus so that that muscle has to adapt to that training stimulus. That's what muscle building is. It's an adaptation to the strain that the muscle's getting under when doing workouts. Your muscle's basically like, oh my God, I have to do this now every day. It's like really challenging. Okay, I better get bigger to make it easier. And then you just actually keep progressively overloading, keep challenging the muscle so that it keeps having to get bigger. But eventually it won't if you just use the same exercise. Eventually the muscle will hit the point where it's like, yeah, I can do that. Okay, chill. So you then have to rotate that exercise out or change some sort of part of your training to help apply a new training stimulus. Rotating the exercises is a very effective way of doing that. That is it for today's video. I hope you did in fact enjoy the video. If you did, give it a like, comment, subscribe, click the bell, all of that good stuff. There is a link in the description to my coaching services if you don't want to have to bother programming for yourself, keeping yourself accountable and managing your own training. If you want to take the brain work out of training, I am here. There is also a video that actually explains how online personal training works if you are confused about that, and my contact details are on there. You can text me, you can email me, or you can just like book an opening consultation, book a meeting, and ask me any questions you would like to. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.